There's something about the night when it's just you and the sound of rain. It doesn't ask for attention, it just exists, loud enough to fill every space. But that night, the storm wasn't the only thing breaking the silence. Maya Dawson thought she'd left all the drama behind, settling in a quiet corner of Crestview, California. She had no intention of being part of any family story, not anymore. Freelancing, trying to make ends meet, and keeping herself to herself was enough. She didn't need the chaos. At least, that's what she told herself. That evening, as the rain pounded her roof, Maya sprawled on her couch, mindlessly scrolling through freelance gigs, sipping lukewarm coffee. Then, just as she was starting to think the quiet might last, there was a knock on the door. It was sharp, cutting through the roar of the storm like it had been waiting to make its entrance. This is how she remembers it. The last thing Maya expected was a baby carrier left on her porch, drenched through by the rain. Inside, a tiny bundle wrapped in a pink blanket, dark eyes wide open, staring at her with quiet intensity. Maya's heart stopped. She could hear the screech of tires in the distance as whoever had left the baby sped off. The note flapped in the wind, unread. But the words, "She's yours now, Maya." I stood in the doorway for what felt like an eternity, the rain lashing against my face, my heart hammering against my ribs. The baby's eyes were wide, dark, steady pools that seemed to judge me. "Hello," I shouted into the gray void of the storm. Nothing but the screech of tires echoing down the street. I grabbed the note, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. The ink was smudged, but the jagged scrawl was unmistakable. It was my older brother Ethan's handwriting. "I can't do this. She's yours now. Maya. Ethan, the golden boy who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes, despite a trail of gambling debts and broken promises. And now, he had left his daughter, my niece, on a porch like a piece of unwanted mail. I brought the carrier inside. My apartment felt suffocatingly small. I looked at the baby, then at my phone. I didn't want to call my mother, but I had to. "Mom." Ethan left his baby on my porch. I whispered when she finally picked up. "I don't know what to do." There was a long, cold silence. "Well, Maya," she sighed, her voice like ice. "I suppose she's your responsibility now. Don't make a scene. We have a reputation to maintain. Handle it quietly." Click. The line went dead. They weren't just abandoning Ethan's mess. They were abandoning her. Raising a child alone wasn't a fairy tale. It was a decade of late-night design deadlines with a toddler sleeping in a playpen next to my desk. It was choosing between new software or new soccer cleats for Leah. I didn't just keep her. A week after she arrived, I went to the authorities. I knew my family. I knew Ethan. I didn't want to be a placeholder. I registered as a certified foster parent and applied for legal guardianship. I wanted a paper trail that proved I was the one doing the work while Ethan was off living his bohemian life in Denver. Over 10 years. Leah grew from that silent bundle into a spitfire who loved painting and hated vanilla ice cream. She became my why. Every school play, every scraped knee, every "I love you" mom made the struggle worth it. I thought we were safe. I thought they had forgotten us. I was wrong. They hadn't forgotten. They were just waiting for the right price tag. I never thought I'd be here standing in the middle of my small apartment, holding Aaliyah, wondering what the hell to do next. I wasn't prepared for this. I had a freelance job that barely paid the bills, a handful of friends who didn't really understand what I was going through, and now a baby I wasn't sure I could even care for properly. But there was no other choice. She was here, and she needed me. I called around to a few agencies to get advice. I wasn't sure what to expect, but they told me the same thing every time you need to get legal guardianship. You'll need to contact the authorities. I hated the idea of involving them. I hated the idea of anyone in my family even knowing what was going on, but I had no clue what else to do. I couldn't just leave her with nothing. It wasn't until a few days later that I was officially granted temporary guardianship, though the paperwork felt more like a slap in the face than a lifeline. Legal guardian. That was all I was. Not a mother. Not anything special, just a placeholder until the real parents came around. Except the real parents weren't coming. Not now. Not ever. I thought about the call with Mom. It wasn't the first time they'd turned their back on me, but it was different this time. This time. It wasn't just me they'd abandoned. It was her too. A few weeks went by, and life with Aaliyah was, well, it was hard. But we were managing. I started getting used to the late-night feedings, the endless diaper changes, and the exhaustion. There were days I didn't think I'd make it through. But I did, and I wasn't doing it alone. I had Aaliyah, and she had me. Then, one afternoon, the knock came. It was loud. Too loud. Not the casual. Neighbor who needs sugar knock, but something that sent a chill down my spine. When I opened the door, I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing. Standing there was Ethan, cleaned up, wearing a designer coat, hair perfectly in place. He looked like a stranger, like someone who didn't have a daughter, who didn't have a history of abandoning his family. Behind him, I could see my parents, Simon and Margaret, in their usual stiff, uncomfortable postures. They never could relax in anything that wasn't socially acceptable. But the real kicker was the man standing next to them, Richard Langston, a slick lawyer with a briefcase so sharp it might have cut through the air. "Hey, Maya," Ethan said, his smile too wide, too forced. "We need to talk about my daughter." I froze. "Your daughter," I almost whispered. Disbelief choking my words. "You mean the one you left on my porch in the middle of a storm 10 years ago?" His eyes darted around, but then he put on this pathetic act, wiping fake tears from his eyes. "I was sick then. Maya. I've changed. I'm sober now." My blood was boiling, but I held it in. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me. Not this time. "We're here to discuss custody arrangements," Langston said, stepping forward. I stepped back, shaking my head. "You're not coming in, and you're not discussing custody of my daughter." I wasn't ready for this. I had no idea how to handle the mess Ethan and my parents had just dumped on me. But standing in my living room, with Ethan on one side and my parents on the other, I knew I couldn't back down. Ethan looked at me with this fake sincerity, like all of a sudden, he was this perfect dad. It made my stomach turn. "You don't get to come into my house," I said, trying to hold my ground. "You don't get to tell me what to do with Aaliyah. I couldn't even call her Leah yet. She was still Aaliyah in my heart, the baby I'd promised to protect. We're just trying to do what's best for her." "Maya," Simon said, his voice like polished glass. "She needs to be with her family." I couldn't even look at him. They weren't her family. They never had been. I'm her family. I shot back. My voice felt louder than it was, but I didn't care. You don't get to just waltz in after 10 years and think you can take her away. After everything, you think I'm going to hand her over just like that? Margaret crossed her arms, eyes narrowed. "Your choices have consequences. Maya, you've raised her fine, but you're not a real mother. You're a placeholder. You always were." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something at them. But instead, I just felt the weight of it all. Aaliyah, Ethan, my parents, all of them trying to control me, trying to control her. Richard Langston, the lawyer, didn't even blink. "We've already filed the paperwork. It's only a matter of time before Aaliyah comes back with us." I turned to Christopher, my lawyer, and nodded. He'd been quiet until now, but he stepped forward. "Then let's get this started," he said, calm as ever. "We're not backing down." When the custody papers arrived, I didn't just cry, I fought. Christopher, my lawyer, and Marcus, a private investigator, started digging. It's not about love, Maya, Marcus said, dropping a thick folder on my desk. It's about the Dawson Trust. He showed me the clause in my late grandmother's will. A $2 million fund was set aside for the firstborn child of the Dawson heir Ethan, but there was a catch: the child had to be raised within the Dawson family circle. So, Ethan had been living a life of luxury yacht parties, galas, designer clothes, all funded by loans he couldn't pay back. He was broke. My parents were helping him sue for custody so they could gain control of Leah's trust as legal trustees. They don't want a daughter, I realized, my stomach churning. They want a bank account. The air in the courtroom was stiff and cold. I sat next to Christopher, watching Ethan play the part of the reformed father in his expensive suit. Richard Langston, their lawyer, was winning. He painted me as a struggling freelancer who had alienated the child from her biological father. Even Judge Carter seemed to be nodding along, her eyes cold whenever she looked at me. Then, Christopher stood up. Your Honor, before we proceed, we have concerns regarding the impartiality of this court. He slid a manila envelope onto the judge's bench. Inside were Marcus's photos, Judge Carter and Ethan Dawson having a private dinner at an exclusive club just 3 nights ago. The courtroom went silent. The judge's face went pale, then ashen. She knew if this went to the ethics board, her career was over. We also have testimony from Gloria, the Dawsons' former housekeeper. Christopher continued, his voice echoing. She overheard Mr. Dawson and his parents discussing the trust fund as a way to pay off Ethan's gambling debts. I stood up, unable to stay silent. I looked Ethan in the eye. You don't know her favorite color. You don't know she's allergic to strawberries. You didn't even know her name until you saw the $2 million price tag. She is not a pawn. She is a human being. The courtroom was quiet after Christopher's last words. You could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. My chest was tight, my stomach in knots. I watched Ethan, but it wasn't the anger that made me stare. It was something else, something raw. He'd been caught, and he knew it. I'd seen that look before, the one where someone knows the game is up but refuses to admit it. He shifted in his seat, his eyes darting around the room. But I wasn't looking at him anymore. I was thinking of Aaliyah, sitting quietly in the back, her little face pressed against the window. She didn't know what was going on, not really, but she knew enough to feel the heaviness in the air. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about how she'd never have to live like this again. Not in this family. Not with this mess. The judge, Judge Carter, took a long look at all the evidence laid out before her. The photos, the emails, the trust fund documents, and, finally, the truth. She cleared her throat and leaned forward, her voice cutting through the silence. After reviewing all the evidence, she began, and considering the best interests of the child, I'm ruling in favor of Maya Dawson. Custody will remain with her, and the motion for supervised visits is denied. Relief. It hit me like a wave, and I couldn't stop the tears. I blinked them back, but they were there, tears of relief, tears of victory. I had my daughter. We had each other, and they were finally gone. The judge's gavel hit the wood like a thunderclap. The custody suit was dismissed, with prejudice. Ethan and my parents were ordered to stay away. When we got home, the house felt different. The Crestview air felt lighter. Leah was waiting on the porch, her eyes searching mine. Is it over? She asked. It's over, I said, pulling her into a hug. They can never take you. That night, Leah sat me down at the kitchen table. She had a folder from school. Mom, I want to ask you something. I don't want to be a Dawson. That's their name. I want to be a Perez. Like you used to be before the family changed you. I want to be Leah Dawson Perez. My heart overflowed. I pulled out the adoption petition I had started weeks ago. I was hoping you'd say that. From now on, it's official. No more placeholders. Family isn't about the blood in your veins or the money in a trust. It's about who stays when the storm hits. It's about who chooses you every single day. I chose her 10 years ago in the rain. Today, she chose me back.